Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. I'm Andrew McDougall, Associate Director of Beauty and Personal Care at Mintel, and today's host. A little disclaimer to start with, this episode was recorded a few weeks ago and a lot has changed since then, with things looking a bit different globally compared to a few months ago, and tomorrow may look a little bit different from today, given the evolving situation related to the global spread of COVID-19. We see that markets are in flux, consumers are forced to make new and different decisions about their personal and professional lives, and all companies are trying to adjust strategy in real time and strike a balance between short and long-term planning. Here at Mintel, our analysts are hard at work delivering the research, insights and recommendations companies and brands need to make sense of it all. But that is for another day. Today we're putting discussion about COVID-19 to the side, just for a bit, to chat about something a little bit lighter, and to look at how sensory triggers can change our perceptions and trigger emotional responses. If you're up for taking a break, then please join us. We will get back to the pandemic later on. For now, we wanted to explore how a certain scent or a certain taste can transport us to a different place or time and evoke a really strong memory. This can be a very powerful tool as well. Maybe as I mention it to you now, you're already thinking of a particular favourite scent of your own, or one that you particularly despise. So with that in mind, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. Each episode features a discussion of current topics, from the latest consumer trends and new products to shifts in markets and lifestyles. I'm Andrew McDougall, Associate Director of Beauty and Personal Care at Mintel, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Aisha Kieneken from our food and drink side. Welcome, Aisha.
Hi.
And I'm also delighted to be joined by my colleague in the beauty world, Global Beauty Analyst Margot Caron.
Hello.
Hello there. And today we have a special podcast bringing together food and beauty. And I wanted to initially open this up on one of our most powerful senses. It's a sensual talk today, sensorial talk. And I wanted to focus on smell and scent and just how powerful that can be in how we perceive things, kind of the emotions that it can evoke in us, and sort of the worlds that it can take us to. Because I know that's obviously important in the fragrance world, but also in the food world that can be interesting. And maybe we could link it to taste a bit later as well,
sure.
if possible. So my first sort of point to open up to discussion then is this idea of just how powerful a sense this is as scent. I mean, how this sort of affects how we perceive certain things.
So I think scent is very powerful in terms of how it can convey mood and how it can be used to convey your own mood and emotions. Yeah, so a lot of consumers we see today, and it's really global, use scents to, for example, convey their emotions. You have aromatherapy that has been used for so long right now to convey things like happiness or calm, for example. This is something that we've seen growing as well in terms of product launches, but now because it's been used so much as well, a lot of luxury brands, for example, are trying to push the complexity of these claims a little bit further, and they like to convey things like spirituality or emotions that are a little bit more complex. Like, for example, Goop have this new fragrance, and it can just boost your creativity or help you overcome the trauma of the past. So this is something that becomes more and more complex over the years.
I love this thought of mood and emotion and spirituality, talking about aromatherapy. We know the health and wellness sector has boomed massively. But yeah, this thought of mood really impacting the way that we perceive things, because we do have European data as well on the BPC side that shows that quite a high majority of European consumers from France, Germany, Italy and Spain all actually say that fragrance really impacts their mood. So it's one of these things that, whether it's an actual perfume product, but it could also be the scent of my shower gel or the scent of my skincare product or my hair care product. And I guess that comes through in food as well, this idea that a certain smell can set me off down a certain path.
Definitely. And when we talk about food and we talk about aroma, a certain aroma can spark nostalgia and take you back to a different place or a different time. And I definitely think it's something that's quite underexplored in food, in terms of layering these aromas and actually calling out that this one could actually make you feel calm, or this one could make you feel energized. I think there's a lot more to get after within the food and drink industry, and we can learn a lot from the fragrance industry as well.
And have we seen examples of where scent really has a really powerful sort of impact on how we perceive? Because I remember hearing, actually from Food and Drink, I remember hearing, I think it was a drinks maker, an alcoholic drinks maker, who was saying that they had a gin product and they served it in just a normal glass tumbler. And it's kind of that, again, the perception was that if it's served in a really nice tumbler, that will affect the way we perceive that product. So that's obviously a sight thing. But actually from a scent point of view, this idea that if I have a certain smell, for example, in restaurants pumping in certain smells, is it similar, this idea that we can change perception just on the way that something is presented to us?
Definitely. So we see a lot of this happening in the restaurant industry where people play with aroma. So for example, a really good example is Chef Scott Popovich in the US did this dinner for bankers who are traditionally seen as being very stressed and very tired, and actually one of the things that he did was burn bay leaves at the table, because that's meant to have like a calming effect on people. So it's just really interesting to see how they're taking ingredients and using them simply just for the aroma as opposed to for the taste. And as I say, I think there's loads more that can be done in packaged retail food and drink. We see it done in spaces like, so if you go into a bakery, if you go into a supermarket, for example, and you start smelling fresh bread being pumped around, if you've ever stood outside like a Cinnabon kind of shop and you smell that smell of cinnamon, it's kind of getting you prepared for the experience that you're gonna eat. And there's so much more we can do to get people excited about food before they've even opened the packaging.
Well, they always say that actually it's like that classic real estate story, isn't it? About like when you're trying to sell a house, you have like an open house. You should always have like freshly baked cookies or those kind of smells pumping through the house, because again, it gives you that really positive vibe when you come in. And actually talking about the home then, in that regard, I actually wanted to ask you a question, Margot, with regard to scent harmonization, because this can be really important as well. Like Aisha was talking about earlier about how pumping in certain scents can get us ready for the food, but actually from a health and wellness point of view, for the body and for the mind, this idea that we can create this soothing harmony in a home. I don't know if either of you at all have any sort of scent devices in your home that help to soothe and calm.
Yes.
I don't. I'd love to know if you do, and if they work as well.
So it's really interesting because a lot of it's more younger consumers, and we have data from the US, and we found that there is a desire to harmonize your body scent to your home scent, and this is something that's very interesting when we talk about serenity and mood soothing properties of scents, and because you have these new products that arrive on the market where you're supposed to really how would they say, melt in your surroundings in terms of scents, but also it's something that's very serene and anti-stress, and it kind of creates a new cocoon. And we've seen in our trends that actually people don't really feel at home anymore, and it kind of like helps them also recreate this kind of like harmony of safe space through scents.
I like the idea. I like the idea of having a safe space through scent. Almost to play disruptor though here, is there an example where you could get it really wrong? Like we're talking about it as if just add scent in somewhere and it's going to have an immediately positive impact. But actually it can be off-putting sometimes if a scent is too overpowering.
For sure. So in food and drink packaging, we've seen some quite crude playing around with like scratch and sniff, for example. And so where if you kind of scratch the surface of the packaging, then you get the aroma of what's inside. And that can seem to some consumers that you're just playing around a little bit too much and it's a bit fake. Other things that we see in food and drink packaging is injecting aroma into the headspace of the packaging. So if you open coffee, for example, then you get hit with this really strong smell of coffee that enhances the idea that this product's really fresh. But I think too much of that playing around can make consumers feel like, well, this product's been altered in some way and it's not natural. So yeah, we have to be careful.
Also, we're talking a lot about scent, and this is something I just wanted to bring up just because we live in a very increasingly online world nowadays. So when we're talking about scent, is one of those things that's very difficult to get across online. So are there ways that, I don't know whether this is through social media, but fragrance brands in particular, or are there ways that we can get that sensory experience across in the digital world? I know that there are obviously devices around, but that is very limited to who can actually use these devices, and they can be expensive. But is there a way we can get that across? Because I remember a famous, I think it was a Coca-Cola advert a few years ago, where they had, it was just a billboard picture of someone opening a can of I know, it was opening a bottle of Coke, I think. It was either a bottle or a can. And the tagline was just, "You can hear this." And instantly in your head, you're thinking you can hear that sort of like fizz. And it's kind of, that's really interesting that a billboard can actually get me to have that sensory experience. So are there ways in social media that we can sort of deal with the senses?
Well, one of the things that we talk about a lot in food and drink is the Instagrammability of food. And I guess this is where colour and visuals comes into play here, because everything now is kind of millennial pink, or it's got this a blue colour or whatever it may be, just to really appeal visually to the senses. And it piques your appetite, because if something is brightly coloured and looks visually appealing, you automatically think it's going to taste, it's going to have a heightened taste delivery as well. And it's interesting because you can create false expectation with these Instagrammable foods if they don't deliver on flavour. So yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more happening visually on Instagram and other platforms like that to try and tell the consumer this tastes really good.
Yeah. I think it's the same with perfume. Color is super important, for example, these days, because it's all linked to what we call synesthesia, which is the capacity of combining the senses, for example. So some people have the capacity to, for example, hear colors or smell colors, for example, and it's the way of combining the two to give a little bit more, I would say, well, to be able to describe fragrance a little bit more, to create a kind of new vocabulary for fragrances. You have a few brands that have explored the link between colors and fragrances. So, for example, Diptyque, they released their a lot of their iconic scents in colored bottles. It was last summer, I think. And it gives also BAs and fragrance experts in stores the capacity to add a new layer of vocabulary and have this new way of talking about perfumes. And there has been research on the way colors can also impact the way you perceive smell as well. So that's super interesting, and I think that's also true in food. Yeah,
so there's a really interesting study that happened with wine. So they gave a bunch of wine experts, I think it was white wine that had been coloured red, so it had all the flavour of white wine, but they started describing red wine just because of the colour. So they just started assigning taste notes that weren't actually there, and it really does show how much, you know, the sight can play with your perception of the taste of something, for sure.
I remember Ketchup had like a weird foray into that years ago now. I might be showing my age here, it might be a long time ago. But I do remember they launched ketchup, they launched green ketchup and I think purple ketchup as well.
Right.
And it just went so badly. Well, as in people just weren't sure how to take it, because it was a case of, I'm used to my ketchup being red, so even though the taste is still the same, it's the actual trigger that has the problem with me. Like I was saying earlier about the drinks example, again, it's just this idea that if you serve me something in just a plain glass, I just don't feel luxury, whereas you serve me in a Cristal glass, it's kind of, oh, this is a luxury drink. So I don't know, I find that sort of, that view of like triggers really interesting. I remember I was at a British Society of Perfumery event just a couple of months ago, and there was a lady there, fascinating lady, who was talking all about how what you tell someone a smell is actually impacts how they smell it. So she was saying they had isolated fragrance notes, and they split the room, and they gave half the room the fragrance note, sort of blind from the other room, other side of the room, and said, this is a cheese. And people had a very positive sort of reaction to it. It was just like, oh yeah, that is a cheese, that's a nice cheese, I think I'd like to taste that cheese, kind of thing. And then the exact same scent, the exact same perfume notes, everything exactly the same, given to the other side of the room, and they were told this is vomit. And again, it's just that idea that, oh, that's disgusting, immediately like repulsed by the smell, because it's a case of, okay, I can literally, from what I'm told, my brain is now linking this to a preconceived perception of what this is. And I think it just shows us how powerful, I mean, you're talking about triggers as well of scent, but it really is important.
But those negative triggers are just as important actually as the positive ones. So we see a lot of jeopardy, what I call jeopardy innovation, coming out in food and drink. So a great example would be Doritos roulettes, where you know that sort of every fifth crisp or whatever is going to be super hot, and it's almost that anticipation of, I'm going to, something's about to happen, that response, whether it's positive or negative, it's going above and beyond the normal product delivery, and it creates kind of an emotional attachment to that product. We see it with jelly beans as well. So jelly beans where you might have some that are a really pleasant flavour and one will be an earwax flavour. And we're seeing a load of playful innovation in that, because whether it's positive or negative, it's eliciting a strong response in the consumer.
I feel positively and negatively about both of those examples, in the sense that the Doritos example is like, oh yeah, I really want that hot one, and then when you have it, it's like, I'm just going to eat more crisps now because it was too hot. But the jelly bean one, I hate that. I hate. I just want to get into jelly beans and just enjoy them. I don't want to have like a really
the risk.
Random, yeah, I don't want that risk. I don't want to run that risk going forward.
Well, yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more playful innovation, playing with all the senses. So be it visual, be it smell, and I would love to see it go even further, because when we started talking about this topic, I started thinking, well, food manufacturers have the ability to play with aroma to kind of take you to a different place, the way we see happening in the restaurant. So, for example, around Wimbledon, why not when you open a pack of fresh strawberries, have that smell of fresh cut grass to kind of take you to a different place? Or, you know, there's so much you can do in terms of playfulness and be overt about it. Tell consumers, you know, we're playing with you a little bit here, and, you know, go with us and play, because consumers are much more willing now to immerse themselves in different sensory experiences.
I love this thought of, you mentioned there about taking you to a different place. I love that idea. And I've definitely sat in restaurants before, or sometimes when you're eating certain foods, and it will just remind you of when you're on holiday in Italy or in Greece or wherever. You know, and it just takes you somewhere a little bit different. How can beauty play in that space? I mean, obviously perfume is obviously its own category on its own, but how can beauty use scent in that way to actually take people to another place? How important is that from a beauty brand point of view?
This is interesting because you have kind of two ways to play on it. A lot of it is actually all about gourmand scents. So all the scents that have edible notes, for example. It can be in a body care product, for example. It can be in a fragrance. It can be all categories. So you have, for example, a lot of body care products that are scented, like birthday cake, for example. So you have this kind of nostalgia kind of trigger once again with the smell. But also in Asia, you have things like chai, for example, the notes of chai. You even have a fragrance that uses notes that recall the tom yum soup scent. So you have things like that emerging about gourmet scents, and that are not only the sweet ones, but also savory ones. So, for example, Hermes, they released a scent around black lemon, and it's Middle Eastern ingredient, but it's savory. So you have this type of nostalgia, and then you have just again just the storytelling of nostalgia. So you have very retro notes as well that you can use, and that just recall fragrances that were used in the past, and that are not like notes that are not very used today, but that could just link it to, I don't know, how your grandma or how your mom was smelling when you were young, for example.
How important could nostalgia be? You mentioned that, but how important could that be in making that personal connection with people? Because I remember seeing there was an Italian fragrance advert on the television. I think it was Idea Bellissimo or something like that. And they basically, their advert was around the Christmas time. I think it was a year ago now. But it was basically a man and a woman who, for all intents and purposes, were in a relationship, but they were separated geographically. But she sent him a jumper for Christmas, and she put her fragrance on the jumper, because it was this idea that when he opened the package, he picked the jumper out of the box, and he was just, it was a nice jumper, but he put it and he could smell her on the jumper. And it was this idea that you can make that connection even though geographically so separate and so apart, but you can make that connection. So that personal connection, nostalgia really seems to feed into that, this idea that, oh, that reminds me of just such a positive memory for me.
So we certainly see food and drink companies playing with nostalgia a lot in terms of product innovation. So Lay's over in the United States, they did a grilled cheese and tomato soup flavoured crisp as a limited edition. So taking you back to that time when maybe as a child you felt really comfortable, you felt really safe. We're seeing flavours like sticky toffee pudding and rhubarb and custard in confectionery and in chocolate and so on coming to the fore. So food companies are definitely trying to recapture or capture that nostalgia for people, and we're seeing a lot of that come through.
And I think candies are quite linked to nostalgia in people. They're used in fragrances as well. You have, for example, Frédéric Malle. They released a perfume called Salgos, and it's actually one of the notes is a Malabar note, and Malabar was actually a very famous candy or chewing gum, bubble gum for kids in the 90s in France. And recently you have a Scent Library in China. They also released a White Rabbit collection, and White Rabbit is this kind of milky candies. And I'm sure there are a lot of things going on as well in food around candies and biscuits and things like that.
Sweet shop flavours, pudding flavours. We're seeing a lot of being taken from one category and put into another category, so, for sure.
Is that potentially showing that we're hindered in going forward, like the fact that we're harking back to the past so much, or that we want to hark back to the past so much, or is it just more a sign that actually it is much more about comfort and emotional and actually connecting with people? It's not about saying there aren't these new things we can look at, because ultimately we're going to live these things anyway, but it's just about actually saying this is where I feel comfortable. Is that important in selling food and selling beauty products as well?
For me, it's important. I don't think it's happening in isolation of new things happening. So we're seeing loads of new wacky weird flavour combinations happening at the same time, but I think it's just that safe space. It's kind of
nostalgia gives you that safety net.
Yeah, I know what to expect from this flavour, and what we are seeing is that those old flavours are being kind of upgraded, so that maybe being made more premium or more healthy, for example, putting a healthy twist on an old favourite, but they do keep coming back, and there's nothing new under the sun. I think for consumers it's just giving them something that they can relate to.
Talking about flavour, it's really interesting actually when you talk about that safety net, because in oral care we've seen this with toothpaste flavours, particularly in Western markets. It's very much one of these things where you have all these fruit flavours, strawberry, lemon, all these different flavours, and it was always a case of, this is a great way and this is a great innovative approach to have to present new flavours to consumers. What we found is it's so different from the mint flavour that Western markets have been used to for so long that actually it was too much of a shock. And so now the most successful brand, there's a brand called Marvis who have a great range of products now, which is like ginger and mint, licorice and mint, orange and mint. So it's sort of saying there is a new flavour here, but here's your safety
Here's
net.
the recognisable hook that you're comfortable with, and we'll just stretch you a little bit with the lemon, with the ginger, for sure.
Would you try any of these weird flavours? Is there anything you have tried recently that you've just thought, I do need my safety net, or is there anything that you've tried that you've just thought, that is my safety net?
So I'm quite wacky with my food choices anyway. I like to try weird things, but the toothpaste one, I tried a lemon toothpaste abroad, and I was not amused.
No.
It just felt it was just such a strange feeling in my mouth. I was too far out of my comfort zone with that, for sure.
And is that something then you think that in certain categories we need that familiarity, and in certain other categories we can stretch the boundaries a little bit more with sort of the scents, and we can have different smelling products or different tasting products for certain categories, but there are some categories you don't mess with?
No, I think you always need to have a safety net at some point, except if you're a very niche fragrance brand or beauty brand, and then you can really experiment, and people are going to your brand to have this kind of like experimentation side of it. But I think safety net is true also in beauty brands. And even if we have figures, for example, in Europe, where people really want to wear unique notes, or they want to wear something unique in terms of scent, for example, what they consider unique is actually, or what they consider unusual as well. We have figures about unusual scents and how people are actually interested in them. It needs to remain approachable, and it needs to remain something that has, as you say, a safety net. A brand that is doing it really well is Paco Rabanne. They launched something called Pa Collection. So it's a collection of fragrances, and they have these very interesting, very unique notes. For example, wasabi. They also have a note called Crystal Fizz, for example. But in a way, these scents are still very approachable. They're kind of unique. They're very different, but it's not a big shock, I would say. Yeah.
It's interesting as well you say about that, because customization is probably a different topic we could discuss another day, because it's such a big topic. But it's interesting you say about how people want that unique scent, but then actually when you come down to it, as you say, there is that safety net, and that's something that brings everyone together, because there's the example Scentbird, for example, with their they actually used a lot of their sales data to realise that there were basically 4 common scent notes that were selling well to men and women, and so then they streamlined their range down to just be these 4 notes. And so it's almost like, yes, customization is a good thing, but it's also a case of actually we can streamline our process, have less waste, reduce cost as well, which is a good thing, but actually just realise that actually this is what people want, this is the scent people want. And those common scents, as you say, can be that safety net for a lot of people.
Yes, you have you have this, but also it's very true, but because fragrance is also very intimate in a way, you kind of want to blend in as well a little bit. You don't want to have this kind of like radical smell, and this is something that is quite cultural, because you have different regions in the world where different scents are actually either I don't know, subversive, whereas in another country it wouldn't be, or that it wouldn't be like it would be pleasant in a region but unpleasant in another one. So
that's a great point, actually, how culturally things change. So what we perceive to be nice and what we perceive to be horrible actually changes from a scent and a taste point of view. Sorry to butt in there.
No.
I just thought that's such a good point. That what we're talking about now, if we were in sort of Southeast Asia, or if we're in the Middle East or in Africa, or even if we're in the States, it would be it's a case of it's very different.
For sure. And I think with innovation in food, we're seeing a lot of borrowing from other regions. So, for example, we're sat here in Europe at the moment, so borrowing flavour or fragrance notes from other cultures. We're seeing a lot of that coming into food product development. So what might be quite normal in another market, so borrowing the taste of rose, for example, or orange blossom. We're seeing a load of botanical flavours coming into bakery, as an example, because I look after biscuits, one of the things I do. That's quite normal in other markets, maybe Middle Eastern markets, but over here that's quite novel and quite new. So we're seing a lot of that happening as well.
Well, just as a final point then, just on that, we've talked a lot about radical scents and things like that. I did send you some homework before we turned up today, and we did promise each other we wouldn't talk about this before so that we'd shock all of us. But I did want you to come up with a scent or a taste, a sensorial experience basically, that was positive for you and maybe has a nostalgic feeling, and maybe potentially a negative one for you. And it can be, this is completely your own opinion, no one's judging based on anything. I do remember once, actually, about a year and a half ago, I sat down with you, Aisha, and another colleague, and we did a taste thing from different products around the world, just harking back.
Oh, you're bringing up bad memories.
And that was but that was really interesting, because again, it was that perception of, I wouldn't put those flavours together. And then we were sort of trying all these weird and wonderful yogurts and crisps and things like that. Like I remember the fish crisps. They were.
That was particularly interesting.
I'm not saying that was my negative, but I'm just saying it's just very interesting to sort of see that. And so there's no judgment here. Would anyone like to kick us off with a good scent or taste, or a bad one?
So mine takes me right back to childhood. So a positive one for me is the smell, and this is going to sound weird, but is the smell of kidney beans being cooked. So I'm from a Caribbean background, and every Sunday without fail my mum would put on a pot of kidney beans for rice and peas, and it would have like thyme and pimento berries and coconut milk, and that smell just takes me back every time I smell it to Sundays at home and family dinner, and like I really love that because it just transports me somewhere different.
Do you cook them now for your kids?
I try to.
So you've recreated that scent.
I've recreated,
passing on the scent.
Maybe not every Sunday, but some Sundays, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to balance it with a bad one for me, but it's the same, because actually it was bad when I tasted it, but it brings some memories and some nostalgia. So my grandparents had this amazing cherry tree, and when I was a kid, I loved cherries, but it was actually sour cherries, so they were just super acidic. And my grandma used to make cakes with these cherries, and because when you're a kid, you're so excited by cake all the time, and I wanted so much to like that cake, but the sourness of the cherries were killing it all the time.
I love that there's a negative thing, but it's still a positive memory. So it's kind of so it's not always about just having the most positive experience the whole time. My negative one to bring that round is, I don't know if you've ever had this. I don't know if this was a UK thing or not, or a US thing, but TCP, the antiseptic. Anyone remember that smell?
Yep.
That's like it was always a really strong smell that you were ill. It was horrible as well. It was almost to the point where my mum would be like, "Oh, we'll get the TCP," and I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not that ill." So it just makes you not feel that ill. But I always remember that being quite a strong smell.
Yeah.
And I can smell it now as I'm talking about it.
And it takes you back to being ill as well.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So different. Yeah. Different time. What about your negative?
Mine is very similar actually. So my negative, even though it's negative, it's positive because it reminds me of my grandma. So whenever I would have any sort of bellyache or headache or finger ache or whatever, my nan would make Cersei tea, which is like this really bitter leaf. In the Caribbean, people drink it for every single ailment. The smell of it makes me want to heave now, but it does remind me of my grandma and her love and care. So it's negative, but it's also kind of positive. So yeah,
I think it's because we're having the memories from it, and those memories ultimately, whether good or bad, it's just kind of, it's just nice to have memories, I guess. It's showing the power of it. Margaret, do you have a good one to
Yes, it's the taste of melon.
Oh,
because it brings me back to summer in Burgundy, and my part of my family is from Burgundy in France, and it was my great-grandparents. They had like this field, and they were growing their own vegetables and fruits, and they had so many melons in summer that you had them for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And to me, it's just like, it tastes like summer.
I actually want some melon now. Well, my positive one to end on is actually, I went for a controversial one. I wanted to have a quick shout out to Old Spice, only because that smell just reminds me of my granddad, and I love the fact that Old Spice has now sort of rejuvenated the brand in a completely different way nowadays. But so that was one of my positive smells that I had coming in. But the one that I wanted to go with is a controversial one because it may split opinion. I love the smell of petrol. To the point where when you're at a petrol station, it's like, I don't know. It's quite nice.
That's quite a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't just hang around petrol stations or gas stations.
Sniffing fumes.
But getting off my head on it. But it's just that kind of. I know that it's a smell that really divides people's opinion, but I actually quite like the smell of petrol. Like, you know, when you stop and you're filling up the car, it's that I quite like that.
I've heard that when you like the smell of solvent like markers and things like that, it's because you have a little bit of anemia or like a lack of certain nutrients.
There you go.
Are you telling me I need to go have a health check out now?
Vitamins.
Brilliant. The power of the power of the senses. Basically, well, that unfortunately is all we've got time for today. Thank you so much. I think we've already discussed a lot about the power of the senses, mainly focused on scent, but great that we could have taste involved in that as well. And we discussed everything from emotion to mood to nostalgia to taking you to another place. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you very much, Aisha, and thank you very much, Margot.
Thank you.
So that does it for today. To learn more about Mintel or any of the topics we've discussed today, then please head over to mintel.com. Check out all your BPC subscriptions if you have them. You can find out loads of different content on the site for that. Also, thank you very much for listening to this podcast. And if you want to subscribe to the Little Conversation podcast, you can do wherever you get your podcast from. But all that's left for me to say is thank you once again to my lovely guests. But thank you mostly to you guys for listening as well. Have a great day.